go. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, it's great to have you on. I just want to make sure I've done like 200 odd episodes. There's all sorts of things that have happened, all sorts of people, and I wanted to make, yeah. Um, One little thing I want to say is, did you listen to any of the previous episodes?
Yeah, I did. I was before I went on a holiday. I listened to one and I got to skim one of the other ones. Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard of your podcast until you reached out. But I shared it then with some people in the community as well. So hopefully you see a little boost from Irish listeners anyway.
Okay, thank you. Uh, which episode was it that you?
It was the last one you put up. With I had never met. I'd met come across the guy before. It was the what was his name? Oh, the last one you have up, or might actually it might be new. It might be older now, but since then, what was the guy's name? Sorry, this was before I went to holidays.
So, was it
Um,
Neil Green or was it? It was either Neil Green, Frank's the Nazi, or it was I can't remember now. It was Richard Williams, but yeah, it's one of
but
those.
no, do you know what it was? It was the South African one.
Okay, yes, yes, yes. He was
That's
interesting. Oh
yeah.
God,
So
hearing his
that's not going to be the
stories.
last one. Yeah, yeah, that was it. That yeah, that was it was good.
Those stories, man. What would you do in the situations he said when you got a call from someone like that?
Well, rather him than me. I don't know what I would have done. Yeah. Definitely some fantastic stories on it. I mean, that's what's the great thing about these podcasts is you can really get some good stories out of people.
Oh yeah, I mean that's so. I think one of the things about podcasting that shares with comedy, and now that I also do jujitsu as well, is that
Hi.
everyone goes into it. You got a
Mm.
wide range of different people into it, and I think that's what's great about it. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
probably find the same with improv. Like there's all sorts that
Yeah.
come into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's so accessible. It kind of takes people from all walks of life. Whereas like if you think about sport, sport attracts a certain type of person. Whereas improv is just so accessible. Not everyone who signs up to an improv class is doing it because they want to be a comedian or an actor. Some people sign up because they want to learn the skills and then they end up loving it so much they say, yeah, I'll give it a punt on stage. So it's far wider reaching and far more accessible because of that.
Mm. It, is that something that's perhaps missing sometimes in other performing arts, and they could possibly change that a bit? Because I think yeah,
Yeah.
you want the different views, you want the different personalities.
Yeah, well, I can only speak for kind of theater and the likes because I grew up in a house where my mother was an actor. So yeah, as a child, you obviously take things for granted. So I would have been going to the theater a lot at a younger age when I was a stage actor. And it was only when I got older and I kind of became more self-aware and I was like, why do my friends never go to the theater? And people will waste their money on a horrific Michael Bay movie, but they won't go and see something that has been tried and tested before. And I found in Ireland anyway, Ireland kind of we position ourselves in our great literary heroes of the past and our great playwrights and that. But some of their work is less accessible to younger people. Like take for example, actually the play that kind of spurred me into action is an Irish play called Sive, and it's about arranged marriage, a concept that
Oh,
hasn't been in Ireland for many generations. Hugely popular play with the older generations, and a really stellar piece of writing. But when you talk to friends, they kind of go, "I'd rather see CGI robots thump the head off each other than go see something like that." So I set up a theater group to kind of make theater more accessible, drama more accessible to adults. And one of the rules was it had to be contemporary, no Shakespeare, no old-fashioned Irish plays. It had to be contemporary, and I was shocked at how much people wanted to do that, much people wanted to get
oh,
involved. And that's when I was kind of more theater focused rather than improv. Improv was a formative part of it, but the focus was staging plays and running drop-in workshops. But I was just shocked. I was just surprised at how much. And again, it was the same thing with very accessible. People from all walks of life, all demographics, just looking for something as either a social outlet where they pick up some skills, or just kind of challenging themselves to, could I learn off a few lines and go out on stage? So improv is exactly the same, except we don't have lines to learn, which is brilliant.
Oh yes. I I yeah, I myself as a comedian on stage, I don't particularly like writing jokes or rehearsing set material. I like to play off the crowd and interact with them.
Mm,
I
mm,
feel also when you do it like that, the pressure's off
yeah,
because
yeah.
you're just focused on having fun with them rather
Mm.
than a set thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something about writing comedy. Like I did one stand up set in a to a very friendly audience years and years ago. Uh, I think there's something about saying to yourself, "I'm going to write comedy and committing to this, and I'm putting it in front of an audience because it's good enough." That's a commitment a bit too far for me, because I don't know. Comedy's always felt to me better spontaneous in the moment. I find improv as an art form far more interesting, because of what we discover in the moment. But writing content to put in front of the audience, I think, um, it's such a skill and such a talent that's way beyond my capability. I'll stick to making it up and getting lucky as I go along, rather than writing.
But I will say this, and the caveat on this is that, and this is my personal opinion, I think a lot of the top comedians that stand up to performers in the UK have to have an element like that because there's a lot of bad gigs across the country and a lot of things that can happen as a comedian. There's a lot of mediocre and I say intermediate stand-ups that can just rely on just the gags. There's not as
Mm,
many that are good at adjusting and improvising and playing off a crowd if things go wrong.
mm. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, I can't. I'm not commenting specifically on stand up here. I don't know the intricacies of it, but I guess with improv, there is a path to getting to the stage in that you take classes and do courses. I don't know how available that is in the stand up world. I guess it's probably an easier route. You can get an open mic and you don't have to have done any classes, so there's no benchmark in terms of quality standard.
Oh yeah.
And that, of course, leans into people kind of questioning, well, what's funny? And if you think about, in an experienced comedian, particularly an experienced male comedian, there's probably an element of resorting to shock jokes, because when you say something that's shocking or rude, the audience will react, and it's not really a laugh. It's more just that shocked reaction, and people can think, oh, that's a positive response from the audience. And I think that leads to a lot of pretty poor, mediocre comedy. Like I never want to go out and pay 10, 20 quid for a ticket for a show to hear people tell dirty jokes or crude jokes. Why people get drunk and do that in their own time. But with improv, at least we have kind of some pathway to kind of, I won't say quality control, but at least kind of teaching people skills around, well, this is what can lead to humor, this is what can lead to drama. You don't necessarily get that in stand-up if people aren't taking courses. Like I know people who have taken stand-up courses. I know some very talented stand-up comedians that I'm in awe at. But it just seems that path is a little bit shorter. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not kind of dissing anyone's choice in comedy or humor. And in improv, we're kind of thought to play to the top of your intelligence, and assume that your audience
Mm.
is intelligent. We sometimes forget that on stage. And I think that's more interesting for me, that kind of path of discovery of where does this scene go, where does this relationship go. We're all discovering that together. But with stand up, it's that sense of you have to have a strong ego going out on stage, because, like I say, you've written this, you've committed to it, you're putting it in front of an audience. You've got to be able to take the groans with the laughs. But improv, we're supposed to, it's not always easy too, but we're supposed to park the ego and serve the show, serve what the characters need, what the scene needs. And that to me is just more interesting. And I suppose that's a big divide. Because if you think in the past, certainly in Ireland anyway, there was a sense with improv when the improv scene was smaller of, it was kind of like the bastard cousin of stand-up comedy. So if you had a comedy festival, not improv festival, there'd be a token improv group or two tagged on to the comedy festival. And it would usually be something short form based. And a lot of time that kind of humor would be more you're leaning towards the blue humor, the crude humor, what have you, and wasn't a fair representation at all of what improv was. Now, thankfully, improv has evolved dramatically in the last 10 years in Europe, and we're seeing that actually, no, this isn't the cousin of stand up. This is theater. This is theater in different shapes and form, which is hugely positive and usually the direction that I think improv wants and needs to move in. But again, not dissing anyone's choices, creative choices in the improv world, what they choose to do, totally fine. But that's just how I view it anyway.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned something that was quite interesting there. Well, you brought to me a little thought, and I thought that to stand up. Well, I did a little thing recently. So when I get up on stage, I play some people. I play Asian Zora. So that's my character. I go up on stage, and one little joke that I did that worked quite well was a lot of the times when I dress in that costume, people say, "Why the hell is this guy on stage?" And that's the first question. Why is Zora a superhero and he's Asian on stage in a comedy gig? And that's the first question. And I thought, as I visited Northern Ireland last week, they've got a really stupid dish, and I think you guys have it as well. Of course, it's a well-known dish called the spice bag. And
Yeah.
so I said to people like, "Hello, senors and senoritas. You're probably wondering why I'm here." And I say, "It's because of the spice bag." And that it got quite a good laugh, but it was showing like I understood like Northern Ireland and Ireland, like it's a popular, not it's a bit of a weird dish, it's not, and I thought I'd make fun of it, and it would be the most ridiculous thing to say why Zoe was there. But if I was to do it maybe in England, it would be fish and chips or jelly deals, or in America, the hot dog. But that would be a cultural reference and understanding that. With improv, if you travel around, do you need to incorporate that kind of thing where you got to understand this? And comedy is different even in different cities in the UK. And do you have to have an understanding of different cultures, like when you're improvising, when you're referencing things?
Yeah, the pop culture does vary, with the exception of kind of the far-reaching push from Hollywood. Culture and pop culture does vary from country to country. Ultimately, I find that we all laugh at the same things. So there is there is common ground with comedy. Just on the Zorro thing, by the way, don't know if you knew this, just relevant to your spice bag, but Zorro is based on an Irish character or an real Irish person, William Lambert, I think was his name. Just in case you didn't know that, so there you go.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Google him if you want to know the real story. But yeah, the spice bag. Actually, the spice bag when I was young hadn't been invented yet. So I believe the origin of the spice bag is Ireland. Somehow the Asian fast food community came up with this dish, and it's become like a delicacy. I imagine in 50 years' time, it's going to become something on a high end menu, and that seems to be happening with kind of fast food. It becomes this high end thing over time. But yeah, if you take the US versus Europe, or even the rest of the world, I can only kind of speak confidently about Europe. You have a situation where you ask an audience for a suggestion of location, and in the US they'll do it by brand. They won't say coffee shop; they'll say Starbucks or whatever, wherever they go. In Europe, when you ask people for a location suggestion, they'll say coffee shop, they'll say hardware store, they'll say, cinema. But the brands get named in the US. Yeah, there are some exceptions. I find that Nando's comes up often as a suggestion now, so we're seeing that kind of creep into the pop culture. I don't know if I'm allowed to name those brands. Do you have to get paid? Do you get paid money when you name those? So I think that's one difference. But like if you take, if somebody mentions Star Wars or Star Trek, we all know what that is. We know what the tropes are. But then within the idiosyncrasies, I remember doing a show in Shanghai, and there was a suggestion came up. And I was actually warned that this could come up as a suggestion because it was a really popular TV show. But they just told me, if this might come up as a suggestion or this might come up as a reference. It's a traditional Chinese TV show. I can't remember what it was called. And I had no idea. I had no frame. I'd no benchmark as to what that might mean. But when it happened, I can remember I just mirrored whatever my stage partner was doing at the time. The audience thought it was hilarious. To this day, I still don't know why they did. But you're going to get that kind of unique pop culture from country to country. So I guess that's part and parcel of it all, but still, what we find funny, tends to be the same. Extremities of emotion, the telling the truth through comedy, the saying and doing the things in improv that we don't get to say and do in real life. I think those things are fundamentally the same. Somebody falling down, we laugh at that. Slapstick, we laugh at that. That kind of stuff is generally speaking homogenous around the world. And the pop culture reference. I mean, with pop culture, it depends on your show. Like if you're pitching or if you're telling your audience, we're going to do a Star Wars themed show, you're going to attract Star Wars fans. If you're telling people we're going to do, I don't know, a William Butler Yeats improv show, that's going to appeal to a certain audience in Ireland and perhaps the UK as well. And then beyond that, maybe not. So, outside of that, though, what we laugh at is largely the same.
Okay. But do you find when you perform in different cities, if you're doing have you ever had a moment in the troupe where they've done you're interacting and you do a bit and you do a bit where the audience don't understand a reference and
I
that
tend
affects
to
the show?
I tend to steer clear of that because you can't assume that everyone in the audience is going to know the content. I've never watched a Harry Potter movie or read a book, and I certainly don't intend to at any point in the future. So, you would assume everyone can name characters. I can name Harry, but beyond that, I don't have a clue. So I kind of learned, I can't assume that about the audience. I remember a show I did, it was part of a charity show years ago, and there was something came up in a scene that I wasn't in, and I said, "Oh my god, this is like foreshadowing the famous scene in Jaws where Quint is introduced as a character." And I did a bit referencing that scene, and two people got it. Two people in the audience. There was 90 people there, and two people got it. I remember somebody come up to me afterwards going, "I really like that Jaws bit. I don't get why nobody laughed." And this guy was about the same age as me. And then I figured, oh, it's an age thing here. So that kind of was a lesson in don't go there. It's unless you're positioning the show as, hey, we're going to do this. We're going actually, it did inspire us to do what we called old man improv after that, where we started doing shows with bits from classic movies and the likes. But yeah, it's a gamble. It's a gamble that with specific pop cultural references that people get or people don't get. And again, I don't think it's going to make or break a show unless that's how you're pitching it to the audience.
Mm.
And of course, the worst again is you're making assumptions your teammates know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
an even bigger trap. Now you can have fun with that. I know the Spontaneous Potter show, that's part of their thing, is that one of the cast members isn't familiar with Harry Potter, but they label that front and center that this chap doesn't know Harry Potter and he doesn't care. The rest of us do, the rest of us love it, and that's their thing. But if I'm doing a scene with you and I make reference to something and you're lost, then what happens is we're no longer improvising because I'm pushing the bit, I'm pushing the reference, and you either have no clue what's going on or you're trying to figure out what's going on. And that doesn't make for good improv or interesting improv.
No, it don't. Yeah. Mm. But it's a bit. How does from your side, if you're in a this is a really weird analogy, but if you're in a bar with your friends, what would you describe it being as a stand-up, and what would you describe it as improv if you were trying to create a funny bit if you were with your mates?
It was like that's a good question. I mean, with improv, it's a shared experience. It's a shared journey with the audience. Because if I'm a performer, or sorry, if I'm going with my mates, we're all in this together. We're going to find out what this show is about at the same time as the performers. It's a kind of shared journey. Now, to non-improv mates who might come along with me, I'll just tell them, "Hey, we're going to go see this really funny show," and give them a gist of what Hey, it's a theme show or it's a musical or whatever it may be. But with stand-up comedy, I guess, you're driven, you're attracted by the personality. So if you have, say, oh, Tommy Tiernan's doing a show, you know what kind of style of humor Tommy Tiernan has. If Darryl Breen's doing a show, you know what to expect. So it's a little different, I kind of feel, because with an improv show, okay, it might be like if you're going to a musical, okay, this is going to be a musical, but you don't know what the musical is or what it's going to be about. So it's a shared experience then with the performers. I think that's more exhilarating. Like that's the thing with improv, is it's very hard to review an improv group. because you could I could go to your show and review your show, but it's going to be completely different the next time you do it, thematically, genre wise, style. It's going to be completely different, so it's very hard to review an improv show. I think the only way to review an improv show is to have a group do a run and have a reviewer attend every show, and I don't think any reviewer is going to do that. But with stand-up comedy, it's the same show the comedian did last night. Maybe if the comedian likes to have a bit of banter with the audience, there might be some variation there. So it's probably a bit more tried and tested, and to a non-performer, they might kind of view it in a different light. Stand-up comedians tend to get specials on TV and things like that. But it's the show they do today might be the same show they do in 3 months' time if it's part of that run. Whereas the show an improviser does today is going to be very different to the show he does tomorrow. So sometimes use that angle with friends to say, oh yeah, we should go to boat nights to see this group. It's going to be different boat nights. But it's a fundamental difference. It's a different art. Yes, humor might be the output. Definitely with stand-up comedy, humor is the desired and pushed or forced, whatever we're going to view it, output. But with improv, it's more a byproduct. Now, depending on your style, I know like we're kind of hypocritical in saying that because it is a desired outcome. But in terms of the process to achieve comedy, it's a byproduct rather than you can't force comedy, you can't force humor in improv. It just doesn't work. It's kind of an oxymoron in a way. But it is a byproduct, so the process is a little different. I think that makes it more interesting. I like coming out of something and being able to talk about it afterwards. And comedy doesn't always lean into that. We could go to see the Spinal Tap tonight, and probably the greatest comedy film of all time, in my opinion. But there's only so long you can talk about. Do you remember that bit? Do you remember that bit? Whereas if you go out to something that affects you in more ways than just make you laugh, it gives you something to think about, gives you something to reflect on, gives you something to talk about. And that's if you're out with friends, you've got that. That's gonna give you something to digest after, like going to the movies. It's like going to a play, gives you something to think about. Um, I think that's a push with friends. I don't know. Does that sound a bit wanky to say it like that? That's how I pitch it with my friends. I don't know.
If it's No, it doesn't. I think it's just your thought. It's not. It doesn't sound like I don't know. You're in church and saying, if you want to be holy, if you want to be this, if you want to be a gracious man, and this and that. It doesn't sound that. No.
No, no. Yeah, yeah. I guess art is different for everyone. Comedy's different for everyone. Like I have a friend. I think he's probably come to one of my improv shows over the years. This guy will sit in front of a comedy film that just does fart jokes and bodily fluid jokes. And now this guy, he's got kids. He's getting closer to 50, and that's all he's wanted his whole life. That if there's a fart joke, he will talk about it. Like that's just what he wants. He's never going to go to an improvised Shakespeare show or something like that. And so that comedy humor is different for everyone, I guess. In that regard, it's kind of subjective in some way. Like that's the interesting thing. Like with movies, some people say I like horror movies, some people like thrillers, action. Some people say I like comedy, but even with comedy, there's different styles, there's different aspects of comedy, and so people have preferences within that. So yeah, I guess you're going to certain people want certain things in comedy, and that's their thing, and great, more power to them.
Hmm. Now, with comedy and improv and all of them being very different, one of the things I want to ask about you, and we're going to start from the beginning. How did you become what's your journey into improv, and how did you become the festival director, the head honcho of the improv festival in Ireland?
Sure. Well, my kind of backstory is foggy because, as I said, I grew up immersed in theater. My mother was an actor, but I was very shy and introverted when I was younger. And obviously, with youth theater and the likes, improv is an important tool for children's development and that. So there was a lot of improv that I would experience, and I loved it. Now, I wasn't learning the principles of yes and or anything at that age, but I loved it. But I remember I had a friend of mine at the time, and we used to prepare not sketches, but we used to prepare. scenes that we would do as performances with the youth group we were at the time, and we would kind of talk and develop our characters up front, but then improvise scenes with them, and it was very liberating because you didn't have the instructor or the teacher saying no, that's not, no, that's wrong, or that's not the right line. There was great sense of encouragement, and being shy and introverted, somebody who just was kind of wanted to do whatever the parents or the teacher, the school teacher said, this was quite liberating. And Whose Lines Are They had a huge influence on me. I used to record it. It was on Channel 4 every Friday. I used to record it back in the Clive Anderson days, and I'd wear the tape out watching it, and I'd imitate those games with friends. There's episodes. Funny, I came across an episode on YouTube recently. I was like, I remember the lines of this episode. That's how bad I was. That's how into it I was. And then when I kind of finished school and that, I studied film production in college, and kind of the theater and the improv side kind of got parked. And it was then as later in my 20s, I kind of picked up. It was first stepping into theater again. And then I realized that my friends were interested in coming to the theater with me. And theater groups that were around at the time were very much catering for, we're going to put a play on. So we might do an odd workshop. So again, it wasn't an outlet. So I decided, someone said, just set up your own group. So I did. I set up a theater group, and like I say, it was about creating an accessible space for adults to get into theater. And we would stage a number of plays a year, do a number of showcase nights. But improv formed a big part of it, because we were now putting on drop-in workshops. You couldn't really work with scripted material. And then I realized I need to get back into improv in a more serious fashion again. I started traveling a lot. I was very lucky with the day job I had at the time allowed me to do that. So I started going to the US, to the UK, and taking as many workshops, courses, and classes, because it was very, very limited options. There was no scene in Dublin at the time. There was very limited options. And I was literally consuming it. I was hemorrhaging my savings almost to take classes in the US. And then I suppose the game changing moment for me was when I met the Maydays back in the day. It was, I think, their original lineup, and John Kramer in particular, because they were highly encouraging and highly influential on me in terms of encouraging me to take what I was learning and start teaching improv in Ireland. So I started doing that, and I started teaching long form in Ireland. And I noticed that people coming to me weren't necessarily actors and comedians. They were professionals. They were people who wanted to learn the skills, because I had um, the corporate background. So I guess that was kind of an easier route for people. There was a bit of, oh, this guy's a corporate background. He's not a drama teacher. He doesn't live in the arts. And I guess that kind of made me realize that, actually, yeah, improv is kind of like what I was doing at the theater group. And this is creating that accessible output. How the festival then came about was, we didn't have a festival or anything of the likes in Ireland. Again, the stand-up scene it was very strong at the time, still is, was huge. Um, but I was in a very fortunate position that I could travel, so I was consuming a lot of live improv internationally. And I was in Shanghai at the time. I was teaching in Shanghai. I was doing a show with a guy called Kurt Mabry, and I was in his office of his theater, and he said to me, "Are you going to the Manila Improv Festival?" And I was like, "The Manila Improv Festival? There's a festival in Manila?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah." And he showed me this trailer they had for it. And my mind was blown, because it's like, Philippines can't be that big of an improv hub that they're having an improv festival. Because at the time, hadn't attended an improv festival. So this kind of blew my mind, because it begged the question of, why don't we have an improv festival in Ireland? So I kind of took it on myself to set up to run an improv festival. I had no money, so I paid for it out of my own pocket, and it ran for a week. It was mostly Irish groups, but I had the Maydays as our headliner, and then just by a pure stroke of luck, Will Luera brought a group over from Boston as well. So we had these two international acts, two big international acts, and the Maydays ran the workshops for the festival, and it was a great success. Now, it cost a fortune to do it. Again, I was very lucky with the job I had at the time, so I bankrolled it a bit, but it was a great success. And a key learning from it was, it's an opportunity for people doing improv on the local scene to see some of the potential of what we're capable of in improv. Because I find that with the arts and with improv, if you live in a small city and the only improv you have available to watch in town is one or two groups, and they're okay, they're not life changing, they're okay. Well, then without any other benchmark, you're going to assume that they're brilliant, they're great. That's the highest point we can achieve. But with a festival, whether it's in your local city or you're attending abroad, it gives you access to the variety and the talent that exists within the improv world and serves as inspiration and influence for people. I mean, how many times have you gone to a comedy festival, an improv festival, seen an act and said, I need to go back to level one. I need to learn this all over again. Oh my God, that was genius. Or you see something and you say, oh my God, that's what I want to do. I think we've all had moments like that in our improv careers. I remember TJ and Dave the first time I saw them, that being one for me. But the festival was a great success, so I said I'll do it again. I remember at the time for the first 2 years, I was getting a lot of stick behind my back from the comedy. Say, who's this guy think he is run the comedy festival? But I just kept at it, and by the third year, we broke even in terms of making it work, and we've run. That was 2013 was the first festival. There's been 10 editions of it because COVID kind of shut it down for a year or two. But yeah, we're still going. We're still going, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to, showcase in Ireland, the acts that we've had over, and how the improv scene has evolved and developed since then. But it's running a festival is tireless. It is tireless. It is an all year round job. Certainly in Ireland, we don't get any funding. We've only once ever gotten funding, and that wasn't from the Arts Council in Ireland. That was from the EU. Um, there is a campaign in Ireland at the moment to have comedy recognised as an art form, because it's not recognised as an art form from the funding body. So that's the legislation being pushed through our Houses of Parliament through the Dáil to recognize that, and that's going to be a game changer. But in the meantime, everything with the festival, you're doing it yourself, because you've become the artistic director, you become the accountant, the finance manager, the operations manager. You're doing it all off your own back, and that's the thing with festivals, is that's replicated the world over. I'm not on my own on that path, but you have to be into it, because if you don't care about what you're doing, if you're not passionate what you're doing, it's a house of cards is going to fall down. So it's very rewarding, but it's very tiring and challenging in making it work. So that was, kind of where it brought me to. I get very passionate about the art form. I still am. It's like, in many ways, as sad as it sounds, it's probably one of the first things I think about in the morning and one of the last things I think about at night. Um, to me, improv was never a stepping stone to being an actor, to being on TV. To me, improv is the end goal. I'm very interested in what we can achieve in the art form. I'm very interested in seeing where it takes us. So I serve improv. Improv is my master as such, and that's it's just something that I don't tire of. Well, that's not always true. We all need breaks, but it's not. It's an art form that I don't tire of, and you met a lot of good people through it as well. Some fantastic people through it, and so yeah, long may that continue in terms of what festivals, be it me running the festival in Dublin in the future or somebody else. Long may that kind of serve the improv scene and help raise the bar for us all.
Mm.
I'm feeling I went wildly off topic there, but hopefully that makes sense.
What is it that's made you fall in love with the festival? What is it that so when you did it the first year, what is it that you enjoyed? Like the buzz of seeing audiences enjoy it and seeing new acts come in and like astound you?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of parts. There's always something about seeing people who have people have varying relationships with improv. Some people are really into it and will travel. Some people are just happy to take workshops in their hometown and do jams, be in shows locally. But to have someone from the local scene watch a visiting act and come out of it going, "Oh my God, that was amazing! They were brilliant." That's very rewarding, and seeing that audience reaction. So that's something I feed off, but it's also as well a great opportunity for local artists to kind of go, okay, we should up our game here. Look what this group have achieved, or we're now part of a festival. We should strive to kind of up our game and challenge ourselves to raise the bar. Um, with the improv festival in Dublin, like improv performance tends to be largely unpaid, but with the improv festival, we always give the acts a cut of the ticket sales. Now, it's not going to pay for your flights halfway around the world, but it's a symbolic gesture to show that we're putting a value on the art form, and that's something that's always been very important to me. I think there was only 1 or 2 years where we couldn't do it for financial reasons, but every other year it has been done that way, and it's just a symbolic gesture to show this is an art form. We're putting a value on it. Bring your A game to the table. And I think that's important as well for your local acts with festivals to kind of see, yeah, this is not just your Friday night in a pub doing bar prov or whatever the case may be. This is a chance that I have an audience that I wouldn't normally get doing my regular shows. Here's a chance for me to have them walk away, go back to their home country and say, I saw this group in Dublin and they did this, or whatever the case may be. So that's another aspect. I find that very, very rewarding as well.
Hmm. And what do you find the hardest thing is about managing it all? Because there's a lot of things, even when I run a gig myself in London, with there's a few things that off people. Sometimes when I speak to comics or speak to audience members, they'll say things to me about gigs and even my own gig, but it's clearly from people that haven't taken a step on the other side. They don't see the full picture of things.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you being like a festival director, you must get a lot of that where people will make suggestions, they'll say things to you and you're like, you've definitely not considered like how it affects me or like the full picture.
Yeah, I suppose I learned the hard way back in the theater days that a horse is or a camel is a horse designed by committee. I used to run things by committee, and I found it a frustrating and and useless process in the arts. And I mean, I used to have massive arguments with people and falling out with people over it. And I decided when I was going down, when I was committing full time to improv, I'm not gonna do that. So the festival, for better or for worse, was very much an authoritarian thing, where it was kind of like I'm not putting a committee together on this, and I had a very
Mm.
closed circle of trust. And I had met before the festival came about. I'd met a lady in Ireland, a very talented performer and person called Orla McGovern. And after the first couple of years, she came on in a more full time capacity with me with the festival. And so she was in that very, very small, trusted circle of people I'm okay to because she's very passionate about improv. But I've always felt that you kind of have to have an authoritarian view when you're running stuff in the arts. That course is a double-edged sword. Yes, it means you can get things done quicker, but it also means you have to do it yourself or with the limited people you're working with. But I think linked then to that, the hard part is rejecting people, rejecting acts. Certainly from my own perspective with Programming Festival, when you're reviewing acts, and it's not just, certainly the early days, it would have been a smaller review team, but nowadays it's different. We have a team. But it's very hard to reject acts because it's not a quality thing. Certainly with a festival, we're not programming based on quality. You don't put a shout out for the best gigs in town. And any festival that does that, could take a run and jump as far as I'm concerned. You have to program variety. You have to have diversity representation. You have to have opportunity for new acts, up and coming acts. And of course, you have to have your established and reliable acts. So it is a mix. So rejecting people is hard because you're saying no, depending on, you may give some reasons or not, but it's never that you're not good enough. And I find that very, very hard because who am I to bloody well tell people you don't make the cut? It becomes particularly harder for you with your local scene because, the improv scene in Dublin has grown enormously. And not every act in Ireland is going to get a spot in the festival. And it's not that they're not good enough. It's just you got to look at the mix of what's available. There's only limited slots, and I hate that the most because I'm sure there's improvisers in Ireland who probably do think the head on your man. Who does he think he is saying no to us? And that's unfortunately the nature of it. So that I find that very, very, very hard. But kind of think I have gotten better. I've decided, in recent years, I don't want to be that authoritarian figure anymore. I'm kind of tired of doing things solo and alone. So I've kind of loosened my expectations there. But that can be a very lonely part, and you do sometimes take criticism or feedback quite negatively, and that's another aspect of it. I can remember one year with the festival. We had a booming year, solid feedback, and somebody kind of a trusted friend kind of tapped me on the shoulder and whispered in the ear. He'd heard somebody giving out about something, and it was really inconsequential what they're giving out. They weren't even at the festival. It was just someone having a moan that there was an improv festival. And like I remember sitting in the bar when I heard this, and I was completely deflated. It felt like, I've worked really hard to bring something and to the community, and then you hear this, and so that can be hard, yeah, if you're driving things on your own. So I guess it's a combination of the work that's involved, having to reject groups, and that sense of criticism and feedback, can be difficult, but that's the nature of us all, as I guess, as artists. I like to be softened. I like you to let me down gently. I don't like things direct. That's just me.
I think, yeah, I think there's always a way you can always be honest with people, but you can always.
Mm.
I don't believe in excuse. You can do it. When someone says, "Oh, I'm just being honest," no, there's a way you can do it. There's always a way.
Mm.
Um, but um, I know the performers can sometimes they cause issues, and they're great and all. They can be fantastic. They can also be difficult to deal with. But I find venues to be more annoying to deal with than the performers.
Yeah, yeah, that can be true. I certainly with Dublin, we have a bit of a not disconnect, but we have a lack of variety with available venues. Like we've got really good high end venues, but there tends to be a gap in venues that are available. Between 50 and 200 seats. There tends to be a gap. I tend to use, well, I not tend, I do use the same venue for my shows, workshops, and for the festival, a venue called the Teachers Club. I've been, working with them for a very long time and have a really good working relationship with them, and they make things easy for me. And sometimes I'm reminded of how tricky it can be dealing with venues when, for whatever reason, if that's not available and I have to book another venue, and then you're going through this very formal rigmarole, and you're like, oh yeah, this is why I don't like this part of it. So that makes it very challenging. I remember one time there was a venue trying to pull the improv festival out of the Teachers Club. They were trying to woo me to their venue, and they had pretty attractive theater. They had, it was a really great space, but front and foremost, they told me the price up front, and I'm like, oh come on, like this is not going to be a fruitful relationship. So I had to say no from the start. So we do have a lack of that in Dublin, lack of suitable spaces, um, and COVID obviously had a negative effect there because some of the theatres that were about have since closed down, or some of the small spaces. We don't have those kind of theatre above a pub venues either in Ireland. That's one thing I'm always envious of in the UK. There's so many theatres above a pub across the country. So yeah, that when I look at them, I'm very lucky that I have a positive relationship with the Teachers Club. It's a great venue. They also have a bar on site, and I do believe the social aspect to improv, be it a festival or whatever else, is very important. If I go to a festival and there's no hub, I always feel that a festival is missing out on that kind of social cohesiveness and between people. So very, very lucky. The Teachers Club is a wonderful venue, but I'm very fortunate that they're very good to me in terms of, taking care of me. And so yeah, when I step outside of that, I'm reminded of, oh God, dealing with venues can be tricky, especially when they're in short supply.
I'd say even in the UK and in London, there's a lot more bad ones than good ones. I'm sorry
Mm,
to say that, but there's a hell of a lot more bad ones than good ones. A hell of a lot.
mm, yeah. I mean, what we need is the equivalent of WeWork or something that come along and just set up theaters around the world, and you just rent it from them or something. That's probably something that serve us. But yeah, I don't know where it's going to end up. I don't, certainly in my lifetime, I don't see things radically changing in Ireland where we're going to certainly have an abundance of venues. But it would definitely be good for us all to see a bit of a growth in that area. But yeah, I'm not dissing anything. I'm very, very lucky with the Teachers Club. I love the venue. The people there are wonderful, and I have a very good working relationship. So I am lucky in that regard.
And with a good venue, they make the job of advertising, getting people in as a lot easier, don't they? And I know that
Well, It
Oh,
depends. Like
okay,
the
okay.
Teachers Club the Teachers Club don't get involved in any of that side, but they're pretty clear about that, and that's actually totally fine.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, there are other venues. Like, bear in mind, the Teachers Club, by its very name, it is actually a club for teachers. But the venue has a theater. It also has kind of it has a custom. It has a what's the word? My brain's going. It has a purpose-built theater, and then has a space that can also be used as a larger theater, and has other functions as a room. But they also hire out rooms and the likes in it. So it's a multi use venue, as well as being a club for teachers. But yeah, if you're going to another space, they may be advertised. But in saying that, I've seen theaters that um are holding shows and they put stuff out on social media, but they do a very poor job at advertising. Like, they might have their mailing list, and that's probably your best bet. And it's always a reminder to us as artists that we have to work hard to sell and promote our shows. In an improv community, you can take it for granted that improvisers and the likes are going to come along, and that will account for a certain percentage. But growth is very important as well. We want to be reaching audiences beyond the improv community in its own right. So, as an improviser, people say, what kind of workshop should we take? Learning how to run an improv group and learning how to market our arts events is definitely a workshop that people should take as well, because that's a big part of it. Mm.
And from what you've said there, what I've noticed is that with the improv group troops and with the theatre clowning from girlier groups, they're a lot more supportive of each other in that regard than comedians. Comedians, for the most part, are not going to watch each other's shows. But I noticed with the clowns and like improv, they're more than willing to go and support people's shows. And I think that's good, but I don't know. I feel a bit, for me, myself, when I perform in front of family and friends, the pressure's a lot more because you want to impress them, you don't want to do terrible. But also, sometimes they'll be nice to you just because they like you. And I feel that I
Yeah.
like that bit of winning over someone that's an already sold. And that's what's great about the stand-up circuit as a whole. A lot of times you're in shows that are tough. Unless they know you, they may give you a bit of leeway. But for the most part, you really need to be on top of your game. They don't know you. You've got to win them over. And I think I like that. I don't That's the only criticism, but I do like the fact that clowns and improv theatres are quite supportive. And I do feel, maybe because stand-up's a very individual field, I do feel that stand-ups could support each other a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Generally speaking, improvisers will support other improvisers and go to shows and things like that. As a general rule, with the improv festival, I won't program a group that will turn up to their show and leave. I've no time for that. Doesn't matter who you are. But generally speaking, with improvisers, yeah, we'll come and support you. Like, I remember first time I saw TJ and Dave, it was in Chicago a long time ago. It was in the old IO near Wrigley Field. And I went into the place looking around. The place was packed because they sell out every week in advance, and the place was packed. But I looked around; it was all improvisers. I was like, "Oh wow, here we are in like the hub of one of the hubs of improv in Chicago, and surrounded by improvisers at this acclaimed show." And that was something I'd taken back to Ireland. Is bums on seats comes from building community. So that is a huge positive. I mean, I understand why in stand up, and it's the same probably in music as well, why that might happen. But community, I really do dislike the word community because it's kind of a word that gets weaponized a lot. But when you talk about community in terms of the people who are involved and engaged with the scene, we improv does lean into that, because you tend to take workshops, you meet people. Oh, hey, you're doing a show, Marvin. Yeah, I'll come along and support you. Of course, the flip side of it is, an artist, if you're an improv teacher doing a show in front of your local improv scene, including your students, can be one of the toughest things you do, because you this better not suck. Sometimes, sometimes it's more relaxing to do a show in a different city where you're like, well, if this sucks, no one's going to care anyway. But the pressure of doing a show, less so about in front of your peers, but I find if you're like, well, you're an improv teacher, you teach improv, this better be bloody good. I find that can be a pressure sometimes, particularly if your students are attending.
Mm. Oh God, yes. What do you feel when you have someone that you've taught come in and watch you? That must be like, oh God, oh God.
Yeah, it does. It's best not to think about it, but like, I mean, I've had students who, for whatever reason, I've taken them through, say, two levels of courses, and they may not have had a chance to see me perform. They may not have come to a show, and then they finish the training and they've done a showcase, and then they come to see you, and you're like, oh my God, the pressure, because I've taken you on this journey. I've preached to you about improv. I better be able to walk the talk here. So yeah, it can be a huge pressure. I'm sure other improv teachers feel the same. It doesn't take away from the fun of it all, though, because I mean, we do this because it's fun. But still, I think that's more challenging than having a reviewer in the audience or something like that.
Mm. I, that's true. I think so. This is for next few shows that I'm running. I'm going to start bringing in some old school friends. Going to bring in some people that I know from sitcom writing workshop. I've invited people before the shows, whether they be friends or, dare I say, sometimes girls that you try and impress. Whatever you do, that don't you? Sometimes performers, you try and impress people that you. But when I went into that mindset, it made me 100 times worse. But what I'm going to do next, now that I'm doing it, I'm going to, because I don't know if I'm going to do well or not. I can't control that. I can only control the elements that I do before the show, and the elements, or if I have a good time or not. Or
Yeah.
So I focus what I'm going to say to some of the friends that come along. Let's see what happens. I could be terrible, could be not, but I'm going to aim to have fun with you watching the show. I'm going to have fun with the audience, and we're going to see where it goes. And if I take the pressure off, it's going to be much better. But I still could do badly, but at least I'll have a good time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That is the secret of all this. The analogy I use is queuing. Imagine queuing for security in the airport. We'll say you're queuing for passport control, and there's a huge queue, and there's one person in the booth stamping passports. Nothing you can do is going to speed up the queue. No shouting, no complaining, no screaming. Nothing you can do is going to speed up the queue. So you just have to accept you're going to be there for a long time. The same thing with improv. We can't control what's going to happen. We can't control the audience reaction. So there's no point in stressing over that. Now, I know it's easier said than done. I always put my focus on my teammates. Like I do my show Neil Plus One. I've been doing that for 13 years now, where I take an audience member who's a stranger, who's a non-improviser, and I perform with that person. And that kind of taught me there's no point in worrying because I have no control over this person whatsoever. But if I'm performing with another improviser, my focus is I want them to have a good time. I want them to enjoy the experience, because if they're having a good time, I'll have a good time. We'll have a good time together. That's where I put my focus. Now, I know these things are easier said than done, and it took years to get to that point where I could confidently say that that's what happens. But there's no point me worrying about what's going to happen. There's no point me worrying about how the audience will react or any of that, because I have no control over that. We'll just find out in the moment what that will be. But I want my teammates to have a good time. I want them to feel safe. I want them to have fun. That's where I put my focus. That's where my concern is.
Yeah, it's a thing, especially with stand-ups. I noticed we always put this big pressure on ourselves. And
I've lost your audio there, Marvin. Sorry. Hang on.
Boom, 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 boom.
Sorry, no, I think it's me actually.
I could take it out.
Back now. Sorry, I don't know. My audio dropped there. Sorry about that.
Boo, boo. Can you hear me now?
So I didn't hear your question at all. It just went on mute when you were talking. Sorry.
Okay, what did I say? I've forgotten now. But yeah, I think going in with the right mindset, just go and enjoy yourself and have fun and see where it goes is the better. Is the best mindset to do. Everything else is just there's no point. You're just going to make it 100 times worse for yourself. If you bomb, at least if you take the pressure off, you can have a laugh about it, because everyone does shit. I don't care if you're an improv, if you're a film actor or whatever, or if you're in jiu-jitsu, you do, well, there's going to be times you're absolutely shit. And if you're a comedian, you're going to be shit and you're going to have people that don't like you. But putting the pressure on beforehand or afterwards. I'll tell you what was funny. I was running a gig in Rains Park about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And no, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we're getting a regular community of people that are coming in. I know that what I mean by that is one of the things that I do with my shows around the Southwest is I get not only do I get good MCs, but I try and get people that are personable, so that when I'm interacting with the guests and they're interacting with the guests, the people that come in have a good time. But it's not just a comedy show. A lot of comedy shows and stand-up, they're just shows. There's no personal element to it. But so there's a lot of people that we've known and built up. One of the comedians he struggled a bit and he didn't do well. He was aware of that. But the thing is, he was talking to us about it and moaning about it and trying to think about it. And I think that's the worst thing to do, because when you have a bad gig, you're going to get emotional, and it's better to leave it till tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's it. Like, I mean, again, we could do 5 nights in a row of shows, and some shows are better than others. I always think of this is going to get nerdy now. I always think of Captain Picard's quote: "It's possible to commit no mistakes and still lose." You've no control over that. You could have a show where you technically do everything, from that perspective, you do everything right, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't land, but for whatever reason, that's normal. You can't have a bad show, or you can't have a good show if you've never had a bad show either. So I tend not to worry. Try and focus. Well, I don't focus and worry about that at all. It is important to get selfish about it. Take care of your teammate, concern yourself with them having fun, and concern yourself with having fun. I think that is the best way to focus on it. Because after all, from a certain perspective, improv is play. And when we're kids, do you remember when we were kids and we play with our friends? We didn't do any quality control at the end of it. If we're playing cops and robbers, I don't got the kids at the end of it don't go, well, Marvin, I actually thought your cop wasn't as committed this week as it was last week. We don't do this, kids. We just focus on having fun, and I think we can take a lot from that as adults. So yeah, you're gonna do things, you're gonna have shows that aren't as entertaining for an audience. But I think if you're having fun, that's a big part of just the audience enjoying it. But yeah, let's not concern ourselves so much with that. Now, we certainly should concern ourselves with the standard, though, that we're bringing to the audience. It kind of drives me wild when you go to see a show and it feels like the performers are just kind of having a party amongst themselves on the stage. Like there's no professionalism or polish. That drives me wild, watching that. Um, but yeah, I think we certainly can do things there to up our game. But yeah, this is art. It's subjective.
The one thing that guest on the podcast has said, and I actually agree with, there's a guy called Howard Smith that I had on. One of the worst things that comedians do is he bring a notepad on stage, and that is, he says when you do that, you shatter the swimming pool because you've broken the illusion. The audience want to think that you've just come up on stage, you come up with a story, and they don't want to see that you're doing your newest stuff. They want to see that like you put in a notepad and saying, I'm putting no effort in, this is new material.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. It's also a little bit like getting notes after a show as well. Not everyone, if you've got a coach, the coach, the specific notes that are needed, in a review of a show afterwards, but notes about a thing you did or should have done sometimes aren't that helpful. It's about the behaviors, the actions, and in the moment, as opposed to, well, instead of making this choice, you should have made this choice. That's not necessarily helpful. If you've done a 20-minute show and you're getting notes from your coach for half an hour, there's a bit of a problem there. So yeah, yes, I kind of, I can see that point about the notepad on stage. We have to focus on enjoying the experience, and our debrief afterwards maybe needs to be reframed a little bit differently.
Yeah.
If you are having debriefing, I know a lot of groups don't bother debriefing. Was that, enjoyed that show? Well done. Let's go for a pint, and then that's the end of it.
But it is, I think, do you when you do the debrief, do you do it straight afterwards, or do you do it like a day afterwards where people have processed it?
Well, when I'm doing Neil Plus One, a debrief involves me talking to myself.
Ha
But it depends on the nature of the show. Like if it's just if you're doing an ensemble one off with different casts, which I do a lot of nowadays, then yeah, that's fine. I'm usually performing with people I know well and perform well with, and it's a bit of fun. With Neil Plus One, though, I do take time out to reflect on the show, what went well. I'd have a conversation as best I can with the guest or the audience member afterwards, just to see how their experience was, because I want them to have a positive experience. But I will reflect on afterwards, what do I feel worked for me? What did I enjoy? What did I not enjoy so much? As kind of a growth opportunity for myself, because every show is completely different. Actually, I'm back from the Liverpool Improv Festival, really
Oh,
great festival, and I did a show there And afterwards, I decided, I'm gonna decompress for a bit, took a bit of a break, and I thought I'd just go for a walk for 20 minutes and reflect on the show. And I ended up walking for the guts of a couple of hours, partly because it was interesting walking around Liverpool. But that kind of whole reflection piece and decompression, because actually that show I did in Liverpool was a reminder to me about a lot of things I enjoy in improv and what I need to kind of refocus on. So what was going to be a 20-minute self-reflection afterwards turned into a 2-hour walk around the city thinking about the show and what I want to do next. So that's what I do. But if you're in a team setting, yeah, kind of having a framework for your debrief. There's no point in this going, "Hey Marvin, that was shit. This is why." That's not helping anyone. But having a framework in which we give feedback. I do strongly believe though in the whole psychological process of positive psychology, in that there's no point in us beating each other up with the negative stuff. So focus on what we're doing really well. And that if you have a coach, let them be the bad guy. But if we're giving each other peer feedback, I really enjoyed this part of what you did, Marvin. I really enjoyed these moves. I enjoyed how you supported me. That really felt good. That kind of stuff where we focus on the positive psychology can really aid the growth mindset and us developing as a group. But it's a little trickier if we're going to just mudsling each other, leave the coach, give the constructive criticism. Um, but yeah, a framework for that debrief is important.
Yeah.
People fall out over this stuff. They fall out from not saying the thing, not giving the feedback they want to give, and then they fall out from giving the feedback in a way that isn't welcomed.
Oh yeah, I've always found that too. Yeah, yeah. People, I think, I mean, Andrew Tate would disagree, but but we won't talk about him too much. But
We definitely won't.
but we are all sensitive. I think a lot of us are sensitive as a whole. You got to be sensitive with people. You got to be cautious.
Yeah, you definitely like we're humans. Like I'm no more qualified than anyone else to give anybody feedback, and I wouldn't give feedback if it was not welcomed or invited either. This is an art form. You never get to the top of your game. I'm doing this a long time. I take workshops still. I'm doing a long time, and I do shows that may not be or are not the best shows in the world, not just from the audience, but from my perspective. That's the nature of improv. I've seen improv superstars do shows that are okay. I've seen improv superstars do shows that would, if I didn't know any better, I wouldn't go see again. That's the very nature of art, and that's normal. So none of us are experts. None of us are unless you're TJ and Dave. Come on, let's fanboy over TJ and Dave. Unless TJ and Dave. Although I've seen them do a lot of shows, so I've seen a variety of what they bring to them. So none of us are perfect, and that's okay. And that's part of it. Let's build each other up, not break each other down.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody. I certainly didn't have a standard journey through improv where I took a level one because I started at a young age and it was the journey's blurry. But I can remember my first show. I can remember the early shows. We all had a first show. We all had an early show. We're all on this journey. Let's lift each other up and raise the bar for us all.
yeah,
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, for improv to grow as an art form, our audiences have to grow. The respect we get outside of the improv world has to grow, and we do that by raising the bar for ourselves and lifting ourselves up. Certainly in Ireland, we have this big push to get comedy recognized as an art form and improv getting recognized so that we can apply for funding. In all of the stuff I've done over the years, I've had TJ and Dave over, Susan Messing's been over, so many different acts, teachers, groups that I've had over. And it's been kind of the risk and liability has laid with myself in doing so. It would be great to get to a point in Ireland where the funding bodies go, okay, here's an application in to bring these teachers or bring this show over from such and such a country, and let's fund that because it's enriching the art form, it's enriching what the art brings to society. I'd love to get to that point, but we've still got work to do in Ireland. I imagine similar in a lot of other countries. In order to do that, we have to raise each other up. Let's not punch down on improv. It kind of grinds me a little bit when we see improvisers and comedians creating content where improv is the butt of the joke because we start punching down at ourselves. I mean, it's whatever about other people who are non-improvisers doing that, but when we're doing that to ourselves, we shouldn't do that. So raise the bar for ourselves, hold ourselves to higher standards within our team, and use that whole concept of positive psychology to develop our growth mindset. My God, that sounded like a lecture. I'm very sorry, Marvin.
No, that's yeah. In the stand-up world, I don't know what it is, but that they're never going to stop doing that. There's no. I wish we could do that, but I just know comedians as a whole, comedians, it's a lone wolf game. I think that's one of the reasons why improv and perhaps improv is perhaps more supportive, is because it's a community-based sport. Whilst with stand-up, it's all it's a one-person sport, and they've all got
But
the.
but I've seen in stand up, like there's a stand up night that runs, or an event. I won't call it an event in Ireland, called Bright Club. And the person behind it, Jessamine Fairfield, she has a science background. She's a PhD. She's does improv. She performs with a fantastic group called the Jesses. She's done stand-up comedy, and she created this night and event um, that showcases stand-up comedian, but also brings academics to the stand-up world. So they train academics in stand-up, and they produce, or they create shows, I guess, based around their field and background. And then you do have professional stand-up comedians as part of that night as well. And it's not probably, it is the most wholesome stand-up night you can go to. The audience is so supportive, the acts are so supportive of each other. And she gets funding from that. She gets funding through one of the science bodies. And I tell people, when it's on, go see that show. You're in for a treat. It is such a lovely, warm experience. So she does that in the capacity of an event organizer, and she's been very successful in getting funding. And it should be used, it could be used, or should be used as a template for people in the stand-up world who want to achieve similar things. Look, one person on an island here, if we work better when we work together. If comedians get together and say, let's create an event, that's where good things come out of. But one comedian trying to change the world on their own with their show is going to be a much harder thing to do. Myself, I'm not going to change the world with my own improv show, but I can certainly help the scene evolve if I collaborate with others. I can, if I pull together, I can get greater influence outside of the improv scene. It's no different with any other discipline. So, Bright Club is a good template for what can be achieved, and what can happen for the stand-up community, and bringing new audiences to see shows. It's such a really wonderful event.
Oh, have a look. That sounds good. No, that's good, because it is very much like that. But as a whole, what I will say again, the people in stand-up, there's such a wide variety of different people in it. One of the reasons why I love doing the podcast is because there's all sorts of people in it.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's the art. Like, that's the art. Like with improv, it attracts people from all walks of life. Like I was saying to you earlier, like, it's not like sport. Sport is going to attract a certain type of person, but improv is going to attract people from all walks of life, all demographics. So we have such a wide pool of people who are interested in it, and it's very, very accessible. So yeah, we've got the potential there to take over the art scene in its entirety. We've got the potential. So yeah, we should be thinking outside the box.
Now, what was the thing that I wanted to talk about? What's been the funniest experience you've had running the festival?
Funniest experience, beyond what has happened on stage. Gosh, that's a tough question, because I can't.
Or
Funniest experience.
we can do so there's this great comedy writer. Oh, she may kill me for this. But she does this little framework when you're writing, and she goes, if you're writing a joke, and these trigger emotions. It says what's weird, what's hard, what's scary, what's stupid. So what's a weird, or what's a stupid situation, and what's possibly a scary situation that's happened as a festival organizer, both during the show or outside of it?
Scary. God, that I really have to think about that. I suppose, I suppose one of the funniest situations was actually the first year of the festival. And there was two audience members came in dressed. They looked like the two of them looked like nuns, and one of them had a crucifix the size of your face drapes around her neck. And when they came in, they went up to the guy in the tech booth and they got their picture taken with him. And I just assumed they were friends of his. And very much I was wrong. And then the Maydays were doing a show, and they did this scene that how would you say, would challenge the views of the Catholic Church, would have views that would challenge the Catholic Church. And these two audience members were not happy. Now, the scene in its own right was harmless, but they were not happy, and they ended up walking out of it. But they walked out of it making a scene that was wildly entertaining. And it was like something from a comedy sketch in its own right, that you had two deeply religious people who came in. The crucifix around this person's neck was so big. I don't know how they came across the festival, what had attracted them to this particular show, but I suppose that walkout was, it was kind of funny in the sense of, obviously they weren't happy with it, but it was just the setup of it was just the most surreal experience. It's very much a badge of honor for the act. That was certainly funny. In terms of scary, I think there's always a scariness when you have physical acts. And this is on a more serious note. When you have acts that physical theater and you physical acts performing, when you're watching that as the festival organizer, all you're thinking about is please don't fall, please don't fall. And we have had plenty of those acts over the years. People who climb up on chairs, on boxes, jumping into the audience. And my health and straight away my brain goes to health and safety. We've been very lucky, touch wood, no one's fallen, no one's had. Actually, there was an incident one year in the teacher show, and I was in the teacher show, and we had in a scene there was a person who was seated, and as I was walking across the stage as part of the bit, she went to grab my leg, to pretend to grab my leg, but she actually caught my leg, and I lost balance and I went full forward. Now, if I had been 2 inches closer to the wall, I would have smacked my head off the wall, and that could have been serious as well. And I was very very lucky there. So I think that's that they're the scary bits, is when there's an actual risk of injury or hurt. And as improvisers who do practice physical theater and clowning, that there's a higher risk there. Whenever I see someone stand on a chair lifting somebody up, I'm going, please, please, please,
Ooh,
please don't. Now, some people are really good, really, really good, and know what they're doing. But yeah, that's definitely the scary moments. I'm sure any other festival organizer listening to this will think the exact same thing. But it's an interesting question. The funniest thing is never the funniest bit in the show. I certainly a couple of years ago we had a show that very much moved me. Actually, there's been two shows in the festival over years that have deeply affected me emotionally in a positive way.
oh,
One was a good few years ago. It was Teatro Brew from Italy. Every time they've come to perform in Dublin, it's been a different lineup and a different style and approach. But this particular year, it was a duo. It was Miko and Spazio, and they just did a duo, and they did this incredibly moving and funny uh, romance that came out and unfolded on the stage, and I was moved to tears. It was so profoundly deep, so moving. And that was when I was no longer wearing my festival hat. I was just there as an audience member watching it because it was so powerful. And then more recently, we had a duo over. They were both teaching at the festival, and it was just a kind of. It wasn't actually a show that was meant to be in the festival, because it was originally the Raving Janes were due to teach and perform, and they're a duo based in New York, Amy and Jamie. But Jamie then was pregnant, so she couldn't come to Dublin. So Amy said, "Look, I'll get a sub," and a chap from Costa Rica, Andre, came over to teach, and they did a duo. It was completely like they just worked on a show for the festival, and that was it. And English isn't Andre's first language, so the show they're oh yeah, I should say they're all dancers, so they use a lot of dance in their acts. But they did this fantastic show that featured dance. It was improvised show, obviously physical theater, and that very little dialogue, and it was brilliant. It was almost such a piece of art. I remember Brian James O'Connell. He was in the audience with me, and he had tears in his eyes watching it. It was just beautiful. It was just really beautiful. Those kind of shows and those kind of moments, you can't plan those. And when they're part of a festival, when you've got a big audience watching it and people are seeing something that they may not be used to seeing, those are moments with a festival that make you go, all the pain was worth it. all the suffering was worth it. All the risk of people falling off chairs was worth it for these moments.
Mm.
So they're definitely highlights in that regard. But it's different for everyone.
Okay. Yeah, it is. That's the. I think that's possibly one of the things that I possibly enjoy more about performing, the
Mm.
experiences you get from it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Because we're on this shared journey, I get it with Neil Plus One from on occasion where the audience member who isn't an artist or an improviser, they sometimes have very profound moments in the show because it plays out as a narrative, and that really highlights how much art can affect us. How much the illusion of what we're creating and discovering can affect us. And some people have had very profound experiences. I've done shows where audience members have cried, and it's not a badge of honor to say you make your audience cry, but I've had shows where audience have cried, and when you think about what we're doing, we're just making this up on stage. We're just discovering what the scene is about, and to affect an audience in that way, I think that's a power that improv gives us that you can't get elsewhere. Because if it was scripted, yeah, fine, we've worked on it, we've rehearsed it, we've doctored the script, we've played it in front of audiences, we've gotten to this point where we know how to pull those emotional strings in an orchestrated way. But when that's achieved through improv, it's just something else. There's just something else about it because the performers and the audience are experiencing at the same time. I remember directing a show in a festival in Phoenix Improv Festival, and I was directing the ensemble show. So I worked with a bunch of performers for nearly a week. I only knew one of them, Kaisa Koko Parma from Finland, and Kaisa has a strong theatrical background as well as improv and comedy, and some of the performers in the ensemble did have a theater background as well. So we created this show for the festival that blended drama and comedy, and particularly remember the first staging of the show we did. There was some very moving scenes that really caught the audience off guard, blending drama and comedy. And again, the beauty of what the art form brings us, gives the audience and gives us as performers. I just think improv captures that in a way that other art forms don't get. It's like playing the guitar versus the piano, both beautiful instruments, but you can't slide a chord on the piano, you can on a guitar. So I guess that's the slide chord of the guitar is improv. Does that analogy make? There's about two people listening to this who will understand what I mean by that. But that's just, I guess, something unique about improv is that spontaneity. And when you have something that affects the audience like that in the moment, there's just it's hard to match it with other art forms. I think, anyway, personally speaking.
Okay. Yeah. Um, that's that's those sort of feelings are why we choose a certain field, isn't it? The
Mm,
uniqueness of that feeling. Um,
yeah.
what so for anyone that's listening in right now, a lot of people you look at articles online and they say, "Oh, if you want to get better at listening, or you want to get better with people, do an improv course." How much of that is true, and how much of that is a bit stretched?
Well, I think a lot of it is true. I mean, when I look at the people who come to me to learn improv, I have people who are curious about the art form. I could take my recent level one that just started last week. There was all sorts of reasons paying to the class. One person was interested in exploring, what we can find about creativity through being spontaneous. Somebody else was there because they wanted to work on their public speaking skills. Somebody else was there because it was recommended to be good for their confidence. Somebody else was there because they just loved watching. They love watching improv. So you get a variety of factors and reasons that bring people to an improv class, and they're all welcome. They're all, if an improv teacher does their job right, you'll create an appetite in that person to hopefully pursue improv further and take it to a point where they'll do a showcase and beyond. And I think that's the test for us as improv teachers is facilitating that journey for people. But again, it's not like sport where, if you're going to join a football club or whatever, you've one particular goal in mind, is to be on the team, score goals, and win the league or whatever it is. But improv is different, and we attract all sorts, and it's all valid.
Yeah. What 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 would you say? How did improv change you as a person when you're interacting with others?
Well, as I said earlier, I was very introverted and shy when I was younger. So now I have a confidence. I enjoy performing. I love stepping out on stage. I enjoy public speaking, things like that. And improv completely changed that for me. It empowered me to step into that space and not be so worried about the outcome and just focus on the process itself. So I had a very profound impact of that. Socially, so much of my friend network come from improv. I have very good friends all around the world. Some of my closest friends don't live in Ireland, so I don't get to see them that much, but I consider them close friends. So the friendships that have come out of it have been hugely positive. So it's also my job. Improv is now my career. I transitioned a number of years ago, so I'm in improv full time. So I do applied improv directly and indirectly by day. So I do corporate training by day, coaching, and then improv classes and performance then by night. So it's now my career. So I'm kind of a walking success story for people who come to me looking for classes, who talk about confidence, the extrovert, getting better at these things. I always say, well, look at me. I'm now teaching it. So it's had a hugely profound impact on my life. And I'm not alone. I know a lot of people who would say the same thing about themselves. So hugely positive.
Okay. And for anyone that is listening right now, what is a controversial bit of? No, I shouldn't say that. Or I've started it. I say
Say
it.
it. Yes.
What is a controversial piece of advice that you'd like to offer any performers listening in right now?
And be wary of the cult of improv in a way. So improv can be very clicky, or can certainly come across as very clicky, and that's partly because of the social networks that we form through improv. We make friends and all of that. So the controversial thing is, don't be that person. Actually, that's not controversial at all. What am I saying? So you want something more controversial? What is controversial?
That's right. That's
Okay, here's controversial one. I do say this from time to time, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this. Comedy is the least interesting thing about improv. That doesn't mean it's not desirable. It doesn't mean I don't like comedy. I love comedy, but comedy is sometimes the least interesting thing about improv. There's my controversial hot take.
oh,
Reason for that is, as kind of what I mentioned earlier. If you watch a piece of comedy and it's the best thing in the world, great. But after talking about it for 20 minutes, you've moved on to another topic. But if something else happens in improv that affects you emotionally, moves you, you'll talk about that for hours, days, even longer. And that's why I sometimes say comedy is the least interesting thing. Sometimes the least interesting thing, because the potential of the art form goes way beyond where we currently have it. It's like that cliche thing that we know isn't true, where you only use 10% of our brain. It's kind of like that in the sense of, with improv, I think it's still very untapped. Del Close, if Del Close was still alive, and he watched what the improv scene looked like, and he saw we were still doing Harolds, or we were still doing formats done, however many years ago, I won't say he'd be unhappy or anything like that, because that, that's his legacy from a certain perspective. But I think he'd probably be also asking, have we done anything else? What else are we doing with the art form? And when you look to the future of improv, for example, I think this is where Europe is starting to. Well, again, I'm not talking about other. Just looking at it from a North America, Europe perspective, I can't comment specifically on Asia Pacific or the Middle East, or Asia or Australia or that. But certainly in Europe, what we're seeing is this emergence of a stronger theatrical improv. Like, theater is obviously, a theatrical background has been huge for us in Europe for very obvious reasons. But we're seeing this huge growth in more theatrical based improv, in people staging strong narrative based shows, themed shows. And I think that's going to be somewhat of the future of improv. From my perspective, it's another avenue into improv for people outside of that sphere, and that's where I think the future can take us. That's not me dissing comedy. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely not. I mean, I love comedy, and I love being part of comedy and doing comedy, but I just sometimes feel it's the least interesting thing about improv. I'm gonna get so much hate over saying that now in this podcast, haven't I?
sorry.
That's going to be the soundbite that's going to go viral. Neil hates comedy. No, I don't. I don't. That's not what I'm saying. No.
You want
Does that make sense?
You want comedy of depth, and like rather than it just being funny, you want it like what they say of a lot of great comics out there, like Richard Pryor, or of course the one that's who's the other one, George Carlin. They and Bill Hicks. They used to say funny things, but there was also a profound impact. They're talking about
Yeah,
real things. It affects you
yeah,
emotionally.
that's a great thing. And the same would have been, Dermot Morgan in Ireland, what he did with comedy uh, decades ago, and how comedy was censored and people's views were censored. It's the same thing where there was a lot more depth to it. But even just beyond that, we're very capable in improv of being dramatic, of being emotionally effective, affecting our audience. So we're not just limited or restricted to being funny. Um, I hope that makes sense in how I'm coming across. If you edit this into a soundbite where it's just me going, "Comedy's not interesting," I'm in serious trouble.
No, I think the only thing I think one of the things now though, I don't know if it's in the improv, but I know that in stand-up, comedians are getting more and more scared to take risks because they're worried about what they're saying being taken out of
Yeah.
context.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, and sorry, just as to make a stand-up reference, Louise Omulin in the UK,
Oh yeah.
she's a fantastic performer, but she's a great example of somebody who's doing that. Certainly from, I haven't seen all of her shows, but I remember when I saw her What Would Beyonce Do show years ago, and there's some very serious topics that come up as part of that show, and that I still remember. In fact, I remember some elements of that still today. And there's a great example of a stand-up comedian who's doing it. Like, she was brave to talk out about issues. Other comedians are doing it as well. A lot of comedians will talk about mental health issues and some of the things like that. And that's where you're using comedy as a tool, but you're also bringing serious, real issues and talking openly about it. And that's an example of it from the stand-up world, as opposed to just standing on stage and telling fart jokes all night. Shout out to my friend Dean, who just wants fart jokes.
I'll do this. No, I'm joking. Now, for anyone that wants to find out about you and wants to contact you, how do they find? And also tell them some details about the improv festival in Ireland.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very boringly, predictably called ImprovNeil on social media. I tend to just hover around Instagram nowadays. And my website is lowerthetone.com. The festival is improvfestireland.com. We run every November. This year, we actually we started partnering with the Belfast Improv Festival last year. We've grown this year. So this year, the Belfast leg of the festival is the 7th to 10th of November. The Dublin leg is the 12th to 15th of November, and applications are currently open for performers and for our ensemble team. Our teachers have been announced as well. So that's something that runs every year. I'm also part of Improv Utopia. I run the international retreats. Improv Utopia is American based, but runs improv retreats and been doing so for over 15 years now. So I run the international retreats. So we've had retreats in Ireland and more recently Spain. So that's another thing worth checking out. The reason that with Improv Utopia is a nonprofit in the US, and they actually invest in the improv community. So they've provided funding to theaters and festivals in past years. So it's a very, very good cause as well. So there are some of the things that I've been involved. Oh, I have to shout out as well to the Improv Playground. If anyone's ever in Dublin, the drop-in that I co-run every Monday, the Improv Playground, and we do improv showcase nights and things like that as well. So quite a lot there.
Okay,
So
guys.
that's where you find me.
Well, you know where to find Neil. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think the next few episodes I'll probably getting some sitcom writers. Probably be looking at doing maybe a bit more. Maybe yeah, going. That's what I'm going to be looking at. I'm not too sure, but hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you guys soon.